Morning, everybody. My name is Mosam Watutelele, and today I will be refuting Vanessa Orozco's claim and topic on enhanced interrogation. Enhanced interrogation is defined by the Convention Against Torture as any act by which severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, is intentionally inflicted on a person for such purposes of obtaining from him or a third person information or a confession, punishing him for an act he or the third person has committed or is suspected of having committed. I knew for a fact that refuting this paper was going to be difficult because of the content, until I realized that the content is exactly what the primary issue is. My classmate's original proposition is enhanced interrogation is problematic. Well, duh. Followed by supporting points about A, enhanced interrogation may produce unreliable information, and B, no safety measures are set within the enhanced interrogation room. I will refute both of these claims and their subpoints with common sense, as I have been unsuccessful in finding any type of article in favor of torture. Well, not the American ones anyway. I will prove the basis of this paper encompassing propositions, primary, and subpoints is both vague and ultimately nothing entirely new. Let's start with the corresponding proposition. Enhanced interrogation is problematic. Yeah, no disrespect to the obvious effort that went towards this paper, but I have to wonder how this is a claim of fact. I mean, it's not highly debated. I could readily make this statement anywhere, and I'm quite sure most will agree. And according to the New York Times, Huffington Post, and more reputable journals, newspapers, and sites, the only ones who have been trying to defend these extreme notions of interrogations are those directly responsible for it. That is the former members of the Bush W administration and the CIA. That being said, it's not believed anywhere in this country, or I wouldn't believe that anyone would argue for the aspects of enhanced interrogation, and that wouldn't be widely supported either way, outside of these specialty groups. As far as being controversial, the topic is gold. However, because of the fact that agencies deemed to be intelligent were and currently are backed by political bigwigs for a cause that was deemed entirely unsuccessful, since every cited capture of information leading to big findings in the height of the war on terror have been provided without the means of torture already. As is seen in the release of this information from the government and Mark Mazzetti's article, Does Torture Work?, the CIA's claims and what the committee found. Moreover, not to stray too close to semantics, but anything and everything in our lives can prove to be problematic. Even making a simple decision between left or right twists. Let's think about torture. Of course, mutilating or manipulating someone into doing, saying, or implicating something or someone can prove to be problematic. Problematic, by the Merriam-Webster's dictionary definition, is A, posing a problem, difficult to solve or decide, or B, not definite or settled, uncertain. With this definition, one could plug any circumstance into the equation in the stead of enhanced interrogation as an almost infallible statement. The unhinging unoriginality of this claim is alarming and reaches for validity via human nature and basics of empathy. Moving to her first point, Vanessa points out enhanced interrogation may produce unreliable information, to which the opposite can be said as well, the key word being may, given the possibility may swing the other way as well, considering, may produce reliable info as well. According to the redacted documents of the CIA, notions of interrogation are those directly, it's the same page. I have two of this, all right. Excuse me. According to the redacted documents the CIA released concerning the torturing of suspected terrorists during the years 2001 through 2008, the information the CIA received wasn't false. It was simply information they already had. There has not been one reported case in these instances that have been a direct result of enhanced interrogation. The supporting points offered to support this claim are 1, false information can be given on the sole purpose to put a stop to enhanced interrogation. And 2, results are often manipulated by the person conducting the interrogation. Although either of these statements may be true, they also may not be. The lack of evidence to these claims and sheer 50-50% nature of these statements can mean either of them are true based on the tipping of one's moral or logical scale. But the lack of evidence for these claims, given that these interrogations are mostly done in private, just doesn't add up to a win in the active thinker's mind. Most of the information found on this topic leans more toward trying to coax more information than what may or may not be there. the heavily redacted files that were released by the CIA for review on this matter have only shown that the information received was more of the same that was already common knowledge among the investigative agencies, not inherently false info. Addressing the secondary claim, one must believe that if a person is going to go as far as doing something both unethical and inhumane as torture, that the truth is something that may be as flimsy as what can be expected from an unauthorized practice in an unsupervised environment. There simply is not enough data on something kept so far under lock and key that the documents reviewed for the case of the CIA's recent string of these practices is mostly black marker. Lastly, my fellow student ended with the fact that no safety measures are set within the enhanced interrogation room, and supports this with another assumed fact that interrogators hold the power to do whatever it is as they please. Again, and no means of disrespect, these things prove themselves quite apparent. Even setting up the scenario in one's head, in what bizarre world will the comrades of said torturer speak to and believe the one being tortured over their colleague? In these interrogations, the person or persons being interrogated were seen as inhumane or unhuman, as they were stripped of any rights the Geneva Convention or any related documentation may have allowed them in the United States, because George W. Bush passed a law in doing so. The only law and standards set for these disgusting acts of inhumanity were simply due to the fact that these people in question were seen as lower than human and not having any rights for defense. History has always been written by the winners. Why wouldn't the same be said for war crimes? Is enhanced interrogation problematic? Hell yes. That's why the CIA is still in hot water, and good old George and friends might be held accountable for allowing and abetting such acts. In conclusion, Vanessa never really brings any real hard facts to the top besides what has already been considered common knowledge. Torture, bad. Got it. Saying something may happen is almost exactly the same as saying that it may not. The probability is as arbitrary as a true or false statement, only you'd have to line up every separate circumstance and test it with the same criteria. And to quote a long-dead internet trend, ain't nobody got time for that. Every claim made is laced with words implying the opposite as a possibility, and since we've no basis on which to judge correctly, besides how many of these facilities do or do not torture people, or which agencies do or do not interrogate correctly, leaves me more confused than convinced. Although the Geneva Convention has worldwide rules about treatment of prisoners, antagonists usually make their own rules. Thank you.
All right, well, the structure at the beginning is fine. You indicate what the advocate's claim was and what the secondary issues are going to be that you're going to be responding to. The thing that I think is a little bit problematic about your argument is that you're focusing on the least element of the argument, the terminology in the claim concerning the word problematic, for instance. There's a fallacy that's reductio ad absurdum, where in essence we are reducing it to the most point of ridiculousness. The fact of the matter is that the advocate's argument, although it uses the term problematic, is not really limited to whether or not it is merely problematic, but that in fact some harm does occur. And there's not a lot of discussion about the harm that occurs or the difficulty that's discussed here. There's some kind of esoteric argument about may or may not. Everything's problematic. Well, yeah, everything's problematic. You know, unless it's an absolute impossibility, it could happen. That doesn't necessarily make it 50-50. But that's kind of like you're taking the argument and you're addressing issues about the argument that have to do primarily with an interpretation of a word or phrase that avoids confronting the issue itself. I think the stronger arguments that you make are the ones that suggest that the practices that were engaged in did not produce any desirable outcome or information, or that they did produce some information. You don't take the position that it produced a desirable outcome. You simply say, well, it's confirming we didn't get any of this information, so it's problematic that we did it. So it's not an argument anymore. And that's one way of looking at it. I just think it's not necessarily the most effective way of responding to that particular point. there's a lack of evidence citation on a couple of points. For example, you mentioned that the CIA only got information that they already had, and I'm going, okay, well, you don't give us a source citation on that. There's one specific, it's not even, it wasn't even clear if it was an article, if it was the summary of the hearings that was presented, and the source site on it, I'm trying to remember, it was Maucheri or Mashuri, something like that. That was the closest I came to getting a specific reference to research that said we got stuff or we didn't get stuff. The hearings told us this was what happened or this didn't happen. And that was a vague reference. After that, everything, it's just assumed that we didn't get jack from any of the interrogation that was done. The argument about whether or not enhanced interrogation is torture isn't really made here. You kind of accept that as a premise from the beginning, and I think that that's one of the things that is in dispute, and that's one of the things that's problematic about it. I think you're missing one of the obvious places where there is conflict over this issue, and that is whether the techniques that were used are torturous in nature. And, of course, whether or not they are legal either under U.S. law or under international law. And that's, I think, where there's some dispute as well. Now, it might be the fault of the advocate that they did not talk about those issues, and I think that would have been a good criticism to make of the argument as well. You know, and then at the end, it comes down to, well, who's going to provide us with data in these situations? If they're torturers, they don't want to be identified, and they don't want their friends to be identified, so nobody's going to engage in some research on this, except the notion that it's unsupervised. That was mostly about the procedures used by our allies in the process, as opposed to the American interrogators, where there is very specific guidelines that they were supposed to be following. Now, if they weren't following those things, then there are legal consequences, and I think there's some argument to be made there. I like the way it sounded. I thought the language was very good, and you speak to us effectively. Like I said, I just thought that the way that you went about the issues feels like it's the most indirect possible, and it's the one that uses the least amount of evidence that you can manage to find. And your other arguments are going to be, the ones in the future are going to be much more complicated, and are going to require some more pragmatic responses rather than the esoteric linguistic responses that you're giving here. All right, thank you.